idea what we could say at any given time.
Yeah, for sure.
Just don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is we are live. Hello, Alice. Comrade Alice. Good to see you, Droogie. I'm here with Hiatt Collins from Cassette Stress, the great and powerful. While I am getting this up and going, what shows you guys got coming up?
So we are playing on Thursday at Dark Matter with LB Bystad and Hussy Fit. So that'll be a fun one.
Yeah. That's what's up.
Yeah, that is what's up. Yeah, we've got a couple more coming up. We're playing at July 14th at Far Out Fest, and that'll be at East Room. That'll be cool.
Nice.
A few more in July too.
Bear with me a moment, Alice, while I get the things ready. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. We've officially entered summer.
Yeah, no doubt.
It is hot.
That was what day was that? Saturday.
Yeah.
But it has been really nice and cool. I mean, we walk outside that morning and it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Me and Cordy decided to go hiking
Oh yeah, right on.
in like a heat index of like 106.
Yeah,
And
Saturday
it was a mistake.
yeah.
Mistakes were made. And then we went to Two River Skate Park, and
Oh yeah.
we were there for like an hour or two, and
Oh my God. Yeah. Who all was playing that night?
it was Honey Dagger,
Yeah.
John Lean, Anumanon,
Oh, that's, I don't know what you're talking about.
and a bunch of other artists.
Cool.
Yeah, it's like almost like a festival.
Right on.
Yeah, have you been there before?
Nope.
It's an interesting spot to see a show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw what was it, Medusa's Hairdresser, Anumanon,
oh yeah.
and Titans of Siren there, but they did it on like a landing pad, like a helipad.
Yeah. Cool.
But nowadays they do all the shows in a tunnel, which is still really cool.
Yeah. Is it like an underpass or is it like a long tunnel?
It's kind of a long tunnel.
Okay, crazy.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it does something interesting to the sound too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. How do they get power down there?
Good question. Good question. I never thought about it.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Maybe there's some like service billing. Anyway, that's cool. Yeah, I need to check that out. Because yeah, the only other one that I was really aware of going on out there was when Titans of Siren played.
Yeah, that was a
A while
crazy
back.
show.
Yeah.
That was like around this time last year, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. They always put on a great show.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know why we weren't able to go to that one. I think we might have been playing that same night.
Sorry, Alice, that was probably loud. Oh, is this my microphone? No biggie.
Can you help?
I think I got it. Just gonna plug this back in. Thank you.
Sure.
Oop, did I break the cable? There we go. Yep. All right. We are good. Welcome, Alice, to Book Club. We are talking about A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Burgess? Something like that. Anthony Burger.
One of those. All right.
Anthony Bourgeoisie. In the introduction to this book, he talks about how the original publishing of this book in America took out the final chapter. And it really does completely change the message of the entire book.
Yeah.
The final chapter is him kind of coming to it becomes like a coming of age story, like him reaching adulthood. And if you take that chapter out, then it's just him in the hospital, and he doesn't have like a redemption arc.
Yeah.
He just goes back to being who he was.
It's a lot more bleak.
Yeah.
I kind of like
Yeah.
kind of like thinking of it ending there.
Yeah.
Because it was just I don't know, the tone of the whole thing was pretty bleak, and I thought it almost I don't know, almost bring it back around, kind of like, to me, in a way, softened the harshness of the rest of it in one chapter, which I don't know.
Yeah.
That was a little more effective being bleak.
Yeah. I don't know which is more realistic, but that ending definitely hits harder. I think the kind of the initial take on Clockwork Orange, at least like the first time I saw the film, and I think probably the first time I read it too, you're just kind of focused on the depravity of this character.
Yeah.
And how dark he is for, like, I think he's a 15-year-old. And I think a more nuanced take, and kind of what the author intended to convey, is it's actually a fucked up world that's created this character.
Yeah.
He's not the problem, he's a symptom of the problem. So I'm gonna try and find that part we talked about earlier with so there's a part where they're talking about NADSAT, the slang. Oh, here we go, I found it.
That's cool. What's that on? It's
page 129. This is deeper into the book, part 2, where he's being rehabilitated, and he says, these Grasny sodding veshes that come out of my Gulliver and my plot. I said, that's what it is. Quaint, said Dr. Brodsky, like smiling. The dialect of the tribe. Do you know anything of its provenance, Branham? Odd bits of old rhyming slang, said Dr. Branham, who did not quite look so much like a friend anymore. A bit of gypsy talk, too. But most of the roots are Slav. Propaganda. Subliminal penetration. So, okay, that's not exactly what I thought it said. But I missed that the first time I read the book. Basically, what I got out of this, and if you got something else out of it, let me know. But it seems to me like NADSAT itself is a psyop from the government to make the youth behave a certain way.
It could be. I interpret it as, I mean, this kind of still goes to your point about him sort of being blown around by, all these different forces in the world acting on him, but that it was propaganda, sort of hinted that it's like Russian propaganda that, came over from Russia, somehow got into England, and that people picked it up. But, whether or not it's designed to make people violent or not, it definitely, hasn't had an effect on, the I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this propaganda, clearly affected how everyone's speaking, or at least the youth are speaking. I mean, that's just yet another thing that just shows the effect of circumstances and the world that he's living in.
Yeah, it's a dark setting we find ourselves in this like dystopian London.
Yeah.
I think another part that makes me think that it's like purposely from their own government is later on they talk about how like one of his droogs, Dim, ends up becoming a Millicent, one of the police.
Yeah, for sure.
And he's like, there's no way. How are you a cop? And they get into how they had changed the laws since he's been in prison to allow basically reduce the standards for you to become a police officer.
Right.
And I think that coupled with the Ludovico technique that they use on our humble narrator, I think these are, like it's becoming a totalitarian state. And I think what's happening is they created a problem with the youth. That way they could stamp down with authority. So I think from the very beginning, he's part of this government manipulation. He's always been a Clockwork Orange, and that I think is various people tell him this in the story, like the preacher in his prison. He's like, "Oh, you poor boy, you're a victim." And then later, F. Alexander is talking to him, and he's like, "You are a symptom of this sick system." And every time Alex hears this, it's he rejects it. He resents. He's like, "I am my own person. I did the things I did." And I think the answer is no, he didn't. I think he, whether he is willing to admit it or not, he is a pawn caught up in this wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the various shifts that he goes through, one from the imprinting that they do at the prison, and then later when he gets, when he jumps out the window and then has the conditioning removed, it's like there are all these different forces trying to push his mind one way or the other and control him for their own purposes, and he just keeps getting co-opted by one group after another.
Yep. He falls in with the freedom fighters, these very libertarian sort of individuals, and they end up using him just as the government did. And it shows kind of the hypocrisy of their movement, where it's like, oh yeah, we're all about freedom and fuck the government's oppression. But they use this kid as a pawn in their own political agenda.
Right.
Like you said, it's everyone in his life is doing this to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very dark story.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the slang that I think that's probably one of the things that people notice first about this book, but that took a little while to get used to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it takes a chapter or two before you start to really understand.
Yeah.
At a certain point, a lot of the same words come up again and again.
Oh yeah.
So at a certain point, you start to pick up on what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this book could benefit from maybe a glossary in the back, but that would also change the way.
Yeah, I guess there's not. Yeah.
Yeah, it would change the way you read it, though. If I think he does a good job with context clues to help you understand what is going on.
Yeah.
But it is. It's definitely off-putting at sometimes for sure.
Yeah. I think one thing about it that it's really effective is that it definitely presents, just in the way that the language has changed, it presents a very alien, or just a world very different from our own, just through the language, without having to straight up, have a bunch of exposition to describe how things are.
Mm.
I mean, there's something about the fact that he's using this almost whole different dialect made up of all these little bits and pieces, just makes the whole thing seem like it's happening in another world where, a lot has happened to get it to this other state.
We don't get like a time frame.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it with the technology being not as good as ours or
Mhm.
reduced, it makes me think like alternate history, like
Mhm.
a alternate timeline type thing.
Could be,
But
yeah,
even that's not really like said point blank or anything like that.
for sure.
There is, on that note, there is a part I noticed. He's talking about, oh yeah, page 127. Um, he's talking about, so at this point he is in the Ludovico technique. They have his eyes taped open and they're subjecting him to these films. And he's describing a World War II footage.
Mhm.
And the way he describes this film, he says, it opened with German eagles, then the Nazi flag, with that like crooked cross that all Malchiks at school love to draw. And I thought that was really interesting because I don't know anyone that loves to draw swastikas, but he says everyone in school
Yeah.
loves to draw this. So it's like, how much of an alternate history is this?
Interesting. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Or it could have just been, I don't know, I mean, this was written in the 60s, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, I feel like a lot of sort of futuristic things from that time. There are a lot of things that happened in the intervening years that people at the time didn't generally occur to them. Like, I remember, coming across a lot more, future looking, like, magazines that were from the 50s and 60s, in libraries and stuff like that talk about the future. There's a lot of flying cars, a lot of,
Yeah.
a lot of jetpacks, but
Mhm.
nothing like, the computers that we have and the internet and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think there were probably a few visionaries who had some ideas along those lines, but not the way it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fewer computers, a lot more flying cars.
Yeah. I think there's one author that Neef always brings up, the guy who wrote Neuromancer. We'll probably do that one at some
Oh,
point.
cool. I haven't read that.
Yeah, me either. But they it's also like 60s, 70s, something like that. And I do know that they like splice into the internet and like
Okay.
upload their consciousness,
Yeah.
which I'm like, well, that's probably not too far off from the future we're
Yeah.
headed into. But even that author was beating himself up for not catching cell phones. He's
Oh,
like, how did
interesting.
I miss that?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I wonder sometimes, like, I don't know. I feel like we make a lot of advances in certain areas of our
Mhm.
technology, and then like other areas we don't advance at all.
Yeah.
Some of the sciences, like psychology, really hasn't changed much since like Freud and Jung. There haven't been like a lot of huge breakthroughs in psychology. There have been, but like the foundation, or like philosophy can go
Mhm.
back to
Yeah.
like the Greek era, and that's like it hasn't really changed a whole lot since then.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe it's technology itself that's advanced, and it's some of the sciences that are still behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I think there are things that can just go back to my flying car example. I don't know why everyone was obsessed with that idea, but that was a huge thing that people always seem to want to bring into being. But while I think it's almost less that things are technologically possible or impossible, but more that certain things as time goes on prove to be more useful.
Oh, sure.
Like having a cell phone or being able to, just sit at your house and use your laptop to work from your house as opposed to getting in your, flying car and not running into everyone else who's flying their car. It's almost like we could do that, but it's just impractical.
Yeah. We realized that those weren't the areas we needed to adapt to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like there's also like a huge element to it being like capitalism, where it's like, would a flying car be marketable? Well, yeah, obviously people would buy it, but like, I don't know, like planned obsolescence, like cell phones.
Yeah.
Everything nowadays is designed to break. You don't have quality furniture, you don't have quality electronics. And it's because why would you make something that will last when you can make something replaceable that they'll have to repurchase again?
Yeah.
And I wonder, like with flying cars, it's like that might be way too practical. That might be way too useful for a company to like maybe all the car companies have gotten together and been like, okay, we can make a flying car, but let's all agree not to, because people won't wreck. People won't get in accidents as much. Like, I don't know, something like that.
I think it would be absolute carnage if every person had basically their own plane.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it'd be way worse. I'm just thinking about like you're on different levels.
Oh, for sure.
So like, how would you collide with each other? But I guess no, it would definitely happen. You're right.
Yeah, going into a city. Imagine rush hour.
Oh geez, just buzzing around.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Not to mention you'd have people like crashing into windows and buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a certain point, you'd have to be like, you'd either have to police it more, or it would have to be like
Star Wars, where you have droids flying everything.
yeah, everything's automated.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've gotten a little far afield, but yeah, I mean, to your point, like the technology in this, it's definitely what you could see in a few years from the mid 60s. And I feel like the psychological techniques and all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's probably stuff that the CIA and other people were experimenting with at this time. So
yeah, F. Alexander, the guy who wrote A Clockwork Orange, inside the book A Clockwork Orange, he talks about how we've seen this in other countries. This is how they crack down and make it a totalitarian state, is basically saying we've seen all this happen before.
Oh, interesting.
I'll see if I can find that part too. But I also thought it was interesting. The character who wrote A Clockwork Orange is named F. Alexander, and this character Alex goes, "Oh, he's another Alex."
Yeah.
And I read this and I went, "Oh, they're both other Alexes." But F. Alexander, my last initial is F. So F. Alexander, Alexander F. Yeah. So actually, I wrote A Clockwork Orange. I'm going to take complete credit for that. Not this book, but the book inside the book. I wrote that. Oh, I found the part I'm talking about too. Page 179. Recruiting brutal young roughs for the police, proposing debilitating and will-sapping techniques of conditioning. We've seen it all before in other countries. The thin end of the wedge. Before we know where we are, where we are, we shall have the full apparatus of totalitarianism. So you have this group in sort of the end of the book that is like they're discontent, and they see what the government's doing, and they consider themselves more or less like freedom fighters, and they decide that the best thing for them to do is use Alex as a martyr.
Yeah.
Which they get him to listen to this music that he's been conditioned to no longer like Pavlov's dog.
Right.
And he ends up jumping out a window trying to kill himself, and then that doesn't happen. He ends up surviving, and the government's able to turn it back again, which I thought was an interesting thing for this character Alex. Is he like he doesn't care about this game that the adults are playing. He doesn't care about the state of the world at the end. He's just, they offer him music and like luxury, and he's like, oh, okay, cool, I'll do that
for sure.
Yeah.
It's he's very, moment driven. And if something can, get him something in the short term or get him out of his present predicament, I mean, he'll go along with that. That's the thing that's kind of, I mean, that goes back again to this whole idea that he's just being, manipulated by he's almost kind of this person living in the present moment all the time, and just kind of goes along with whatever, but he's sort of beset on all sides by these forces who are, very calculating, very plotting, trying to use people for their own ends. And he kind of ends up as a, pawn in this, because he's almost, I mean, he's definitely not a naive character in that, he's a pretty, brutally violent guy, but I mean, he's almost naive in that he's not like calculating long term in the way that everyone who's acting on him seems to be.
Yeah, everyone around him has this forethought, and he is just living in the moment, which ironically, in his impulsiveness, in his egocentric attitude, actually makes him very easily manipulated. In his trying to be himself, he actually ends up being a perfect pawn, which is interesting. I can relate to that. I'm a very like strong-willed person, but I think in a lot of ways that it makes I'm an easily manipulated person, in the sense of like, for example, I'm what's the word? Confrontational. And I think that's because when I see an issue, I want to address it. And like, I'm not afraid of confrontation. I don't shy away from it, which means that if you want to like provoke me, it's like, it's I'm not necessarily always the most mature in that way, where it's like instead of walking away from a situation, you can like goad me into things. And I'm as I'm getting older, I'm like more and more conscious of like times that this has happened. But it's that's sometimes a good way back to the character Alex. He sometimes a good way to manipulate someone is to convince them that they're doing something of their own volition, I guess.
For sure.
There's a part here at the beginning on page 44. Something I thought is really interesting. They have this the milk with knives, the Malaco Plus. In the movie, Kubrick straight up says it's milk with adrenochrome. Which Kubrick is always doing shit like that. Like the only other time I'm aware of adrenochrome being mentioned in a movie is Fear and Loathing in
Yep.
Las Vegas.
Mhm.
And they straight up say, which is in the book they call it something else. It's
Yeah,
they,
they have there are a couple of things that you can, a couple of different things that you can order, but yeah, they're all. It's almost like they're all. Some of them are some sort of synthetic, like synthetic I don't know, hormone or something. Um, and I don't know why it just seems so bizarre, but um, having this be in milk, which is just such like a childlike beverage in a way, and then fortified with whatever crazy drugs that they're putting in there. Just it just made it a little bit more off-putting
there are
in a weird way.
there are certain drugs, and I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head, that react better with certain like solvents.
Hmm.
And I think milk is one of those things that
Oh,
makes things
interesting.
react stronger. But on page 200, he's sitting in the final chapter. We were sitting in the Korova milk bar, making up our razadooks, what to do with the evening. A flip, dark, chill winter bastard, though dry. All around were Cheloveks, well away on milk plus Velicet and Synthmesk and Dreamcrom.
Okay, yeah,
So I think that's what this word Dreamcrom
yeah,
or Drincrum. I think that is what Anthony Burgess is going for here.
yeah, for sure.
But then Kubrick just outright says it.
Hmm.
He has the main character just say milk with adrenochrome,
Yeah,
which I think both the author and Kubrick are trying to tell us something
hmm,
with this story. Um, it is interesting how timeless this is because it parallels reality. There's not a lot of books like that, but like 1984 and A
hmm,
Brave New World are obvious
hmm,
examples too
yeah,
of a world that's believable.
hmm,
Um, it it is different, and I think sometimes it takes fiction for us to recognize things about our reality.
hmm,
Sometimes reading fiction can, like, obviously history is a great tool as well to teach us where we've been and what we're going through now. If you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. But I think fantasy and fiction and science fiction are also useful tools for explaining the world we live in.
yeah, for
um,
sure.
there's no way to tell a story that isn't associated with reality in
Hmm.
some way. um, and I think the best ones are ones that parallel it in like a
Hmm.
purposeful way.
Yeah, yeah. I think if yeah, because I think through either science fiction or fantasy, you can pull things out of the details of the life that everyone is familiar with, and then highlight certain things about um, about reality that are a little more stark in another in a fictional
Mm,
or in another world. It's not
yeah,
exactly like ours.
yeah, in a way too. Like tinfoil hat stuff, it is a good way to like get things by, right?
Hmm.
It's like you can hide things in a narrative um, without saying exactly what's on your mind. You can create this landscape and say, "Oh, look, it's fiction,"
Hmm.
when you're actually trying to tell like a very real message.
Yeah, for sure.
Something else I found fascinating about this book is the way he describes both dreams
Hmm.
and drug trips.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
I think this is what I'm looking for. Uh, no, that's not it. marked it down. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one too. And that brought the red out like an old friend. It's just very beautiful and disturbing way to describe violence. Oh, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. Page 5. He's describing a man at the milk bar that's kind of entering one of these experiences. He was in the land, all right, well away in orbit. And I knew what it was like, having tried it like everybody else had done. But at this time, I got to thinking, it was a cowardly sort of vesh, oh my brothers. You'd lay there after you drunk the old Malacco, and then you got the messel that everything around you was sort of in the past. You could vidi it all right, all of it, very clear. Tables, the stereo, the lights, the sharps and the malchiks. But it was like some vesh that used to be there, but was not there, not no more. And you were sort of hypnotized by your boot or shoe or a fingernail, as it might be. And at the same time, you were sort of picked up by the old scruff and shook like it might be a cat. You got shook and shook till there was nothing left. You lost your name and your body and yourself, and you just didn't care. And you waited till your boot or your fingernail got yellow, then yellower and yellower all the time. Then the lights started cracking like atomics, and the boot or fingernail, or as it might be, a bit of dirt on your trouser bottom, turned into a big, big, big mesto, bigger than the whole world. And you were just going to get introduced to old Bog or God when it was all over. You came back to here and now whimpering, sort of, with your rot all squaring up for a boo-hoo-hoo. Now that's very nice, but very cowardly. You were not put on this earth just to get in touch with God. The way he's describing, I don't know what drug this is supposed to parallel, but I feel like a lot of these drug-induced experiences that he's describing are based on some kind of real experience that the author had.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
I feel like I've never had this drug they're describing, but I can relate to this experience in some way, you know. And also, it seems to me that both Alex and his dad have prophetic dreams.
I didn't.
Because
pick up on that.
he describes that basically his droogs were going to turn on him before they did.
Yeah.
And his dad also says, I saw you at the mercy of these your old friends, because he doesn't know that he's still hanging out with these guys.
Okay.
He's like, those guys you used to run with, I had a dream that you were getting bullied by them. And so they both had this dream of something that was about to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that's about, but it seems like that's both him and his dad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just thinking about this as you were reading his description of whatever this was that he was on, because it's kind of a psychedelic sort of journey, but he's saying that he thinks it's sort of a cowardly sort of thing. And that he tried it and that was not really something that he liked, kind of being disconnected from reality. It seems like the things that the drugs that he goes for in this are the ones that make him get out of the world and just start destroying things. So it's like not disassociating, but almost just trying to hype up reality and go get into all these extreme, crazy things.
Yeah, on that, he describes the milk with knives. He says they call it milk with knives. Oh, here we go. Yeah. What we were repeating was the old Malacco with knives in it, as we used to say, to sharpen you up and make you ready for a bit of dirty 20 to 1. So it's exactly like you're saying. Like these drugs that they're taking make you they make you on edge, make you ready for, if not depravity, at least for action.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is also fascinating because they're doing this in an establishment. This isn't street drugs. This is something
right, yeah.
they ordered at a bar. And so that kind of gets into the whole psyop thing again. It's like you have this very influenced youth.
Sure.
That's definitely has some today parallels today. It's funny how timeless this book is. It might be more applicable today. Like 1984, probably more applicable today than when it was written.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because there are things that are possible now that were not at the, or I mean, the time that book was written, there are things that were imagined in terms of surveillance and keeping track of information that were, not within the realm of possibility now, but we have far surpassed anything that was in 1984 as far as all that's concerned.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and yeah, another thing that kind of reminds me of both of the, or is a similarity between these two, is that in 1984 there were all the, I can't remember what term they used, maybe it was the proles, that were people not in the party, and they were just kind of your average everyday people kind of running around living their lives kind of moment to moment. And it was, all the Ingsoc people who were in charge, and they were the long-term plotters. And here that's kind of a similar thing. You've got, sort of your average people either being, kind of running around and tearing things up and being crazy like Alex, or victims of people like that. And then you have another section of people, which are, politicians and the plotters and people in this and that movement who are the long-term thinkers, kind of, pushing your average person around in one way or another.
The movers and the moved. Yeah. They also talk about his old P&M, his parents, they had to, let's see if I can find it instead of paraphrasing it, but when he comes home, yeah, here we go. I don't know that I marked it down, but his parents have to go to work. And he talks about that there's a law where they have anyone who isn't sick, a child, or with child has to work.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that sounds like Stalinist Russia. And I wonder if that's kind of part of like crime was pretty rampant in that era as well. And I wonder if that's sort of, if this is like a Soviet Union criticism, like a lot of this book.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Is you have this society that's like, it seems like, which they don't get into it too deeply, but it seems like in this world, everyone has to work regardless of what their standing is. And they all get money and assumably different types of wages depending on what they do. But it does talk about how there's a law where they all have to work.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, and maybe is that not why like Alex and his group are out always trying to rob people and knock over stores and get money because I guess they're still technically children, so they're not obligated to work, so they can.
Yeah,
They're
they're in a position to do that. Unlike anyone over 18, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely seems that way. Like that a lot of there's the other component to that is like Alex has been in trouble before, but it's like juvenile. He's not being tried as an adult until he ends up getting someone killed.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
There's a part here about aliens. Where is it? 21. Dim kept looking up at the stars and planets and the Luna with his rot wide open like a kid who'd never videoed any such thing before, and he said, "What's on them, I wonder? What would be up there on things like that?" I nudged him hard, saying, "Come, gloopy bastard, as thou art, think thou not on them. There'll be life like down here, most likely, with someone getting knifed and others doing the knifing." And let's see. The others smacked at this, but poor old Dim looked at me serious, then up again at the stars and the Luna. So Dim is actually like taking an interest in reality and like the world around him, and they're like, quit thinking about that. Like let's get back to being hooligans.
Right.
I thought that was interesting. It's also like when Dim looks up at the sky and wonders what's out there, it felt like he had never thought about it before.
Yeah.
It felt like that was the first time
he'd
even conceived of these kind of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the point.
It probably speaks to a lack of education as well. Like they're probably not being taught very much in school. Yeah, it's just overall like a really dystopian world we find ourselves in. I found the thing. Page 40. I'll put your breakfast in the oven, son. I've got to be off myself now, which was true. There being this law for everybody not a child, nor with child, nor ill to go out rabbiting. My mom worked at one of the state marts, as they called them, filling up shelves with tinned soup and beans and all that cow. So they have to work.
Yeah. Yeah, they got the state, and they got the state, the state marts being, sort of state owned.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Like state owned stores like they would have had in, Soviet Russia.
And we have a bunch of Russian slang in here. In fact, F. Alexander talks about, we've seen this happen in other countries. Maybe that's what he's describing, is where the world we're seeing is one where there's like Soviet regime in another country, and now it's bleeding into British society.
Yeah. Yep.
Damn. It's it's crazy. It makes sense for the time too.
Oh yeah. Well, that was, a lot of, the West is essentially running around trying to prevent this country and that country from falling under, Soviet influence.
Oh, really? So like they're spreading, so that like that's a real life parable, is that they are spreading this propaganda to other countries.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because there were a lot of like in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you had, a lot of Europe undergoing, various communist revolutions. But I think that started to spread to some countries in Africa, and I think maybe the 70s, maybe even 80s. Like it was much later, but there was kind of this sort of international game of trying to keep Russian influence from spreading back then.
Wow. So okay, so very much makes sense for the
Oh, yeah.
time.
For sure.
Okay. There's a part here I like too on page 44. There is trying to figure out where to start this. Well, let's start here. My endeavor shall be in the future as stretches out its snowy and lily white arms to me before the nausea overtakes, or the blood spatters its final chorus, in twisted metal and smashed glass on the high road, not to get loveted again, which is fair speeching. But brothers, this biting, oh, this is, yeah, okay, so he's reading a magazine, and it's talking about the youth and how this is like a Christian author talking about how the youth has been infected by the devil. And he really resents hearing this because he's like, no, I'm my own man. Right. But brothers, this biting of the toenails over what is the cause of badness is what turns me into a fine laughing malchick. They don't go into what is the cause of goodness. So why of the other shop? If ludies are good, that's because they like it. And I wouldn't ever interfere with their pleasures. And so of the other shop. And I was patronizing the other shop. More badness is of the self, the one, the you or me on our Audinakis. And that self is made by old Bog or God, and in his great pride and redosity. But not the self, but the not self cannot have the bad, meaning they of the government and the judges and the schools cannot allow the bad because they cannot allow the self. It is not our modern history, my brothers, the story of brave Malenki cells fighting these big machines. I am serious with you, brothers, over this. But what I do because I like to do. So he's like very adamant about I am myself. And as we see this go on, he's just wrong. He's wrong about that. But
that also seems like a very, he's 15 and it's a very 15-year-old attitude to have too, that no, I know everything and no one's telling me what to do and I'm coming up with all these ideas myself and don't have the perspective to know that at that time that's not the case.
Yeah. It is a very like coming of age kind of story, because then at the end of the book he's talking about one day maybe having kids himself. And he's like, I'll tell them all the things I learned, but there's no way I'm going to be able to explain this to them in a way where they'll listen.
Yeah.
Like they're going to end up doing all the things I did. And then their children will do those things too.
Yeah.
So it is a very much like, it's a story of youth. Thinking you are in control of your actions, but not understanding that you're a product of the system you're in. Part of, I think, adulthood and freedom is understanding that you are part of a cog in a machine. He talks about why don't we question why people are good? He's like, we question why people do evil things, but why don't we question why people are good? Which is actually an interesting moral question. I, for one, am very much like a humanist. I think people are good. You have exceptions to this rule. Like there are psychopaths that just don't care. But I think as a whole, people are good. And when people do bad things, it's usually out of desperation, or it's because they are the victims of circumstance. They hurt people. And they perpetuate that cycle. I don't know. We have to have laws and judgment in place in society to prevent these kind of things as a deterrence. But I have a hard time blaming people, because it's usually you have to really put yourself in someone's shoes before you can judge their actions.
Well, and he's taking a very different view in this, in that people are not necessarily one way or the other, that no one's inherently good and then you have to figure out why they're bad. It's just at some point, you picked one or the other, and there's it's almost like he's saying they're just sort of these different ways of going about things. Either you can be good or you can be bad. They're just different different ways of going about things. And that, to understand what, did someone choose to be bad? Well, at what point did people who are good choose to be good? And I'm not saying that very articulately, but kind of that there's no default state.
Yeah, that's just
that you just pick one or the other.
Yeah, that is kind of the stance he's taking on it, because he says the state can't have the bad because it interferes with what they're doing, which is very much like you said, like a 15-year-old thing to kind of take to have. I do think it's interesting, like when he's convicted, and the police are interrogating him, he's like, I am a pawn. My droogs put me up to this. They did all this. So he's very quick to shirk responsibility for his actions when it benefits him.
Yeah, for sure.
He has a shaky sense of self and morality, which again, he's 15, so
yeah,
it makes sense. I guess we should talk about the Ludovico technique, which is kind of
I think that's the thing that people probably remember from this book, or the movie, which I haven't seen the most, but that's definitely the image.
And actually, before we get into that, you're right, that is a big part of the imagery of the movie. And I think the imagery of the movie is the imagery of A Clockwork Orange. When people think of A Clockwork Orange, they think of a handful of very artistic shots that Kubrick did. They're in the book too, but Kubrick brings them to life and makes them his own and makes them iconic. The outfits are described in the book, but Kubrick takes a lot of liberties with the style. I would say that is the biggest difference actually between the book and the movie, is the tone and the style. Kubrick's Clockwork Orange is fun. It's the violence is cartoony, whereas Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange is dark and gritty. And I did hear that the reason the violence in Kubrick's film are so comical is that so later on, once he's punished for it, it's more of a contrast. Yeah. So it's like you're saying it the way Alex saw it versus what really happened.
Okay. Yeah.
All of the action in the movie is very like it's like a play. It's like a dance. Like when they're fighting, everything is like hyper stylized. Like the kick is like a very dramatic kick, and it almost like very clearly didn't connect. Like, and not like a poor cinematography kind of way, like in an artistic, purposeful way.
Yeah,
it's comical. Even there's graphic rape scenes, even in the film, and the way that's done is with a sadistic humor to it. And I think that's what he's really trying to emphasize with this film, is that you're saying this the way that the characters are doing
Yeah.
it.
Interesting. So they think this is just sort of a big game, and that's almost how it's presented, that it's just all sort of a laugh, and that
Yeah.
when bad things are happening to Alex, that's when it gets really serious.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna have to watch that after. Since I had managed somehow not to see that movie up to this point, I didn't want to see it until I had read the book.
Yeah. Good call. It's you should definitely watch it at some point. Actually, you haven't seen it, but what you said is very true, that it actually contrasts with the second half of the film
Mhm.
very well, because not only is the violence like playful, but there's more colors. Like everything is popping and is very stylized and artistic. And then
Okay.
once he gets institutionalized, everything's gray and monotone. And it that, actually, now that I think about it, that's just a Kubrick thing to do. 2001 is very night and day. Full Metal Jacket is like watching two different movies.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Wow, now that I think about it, that's just a thing Kubrick does, is he has these hard contrasts between the first half and the second halves of his films. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Kubrick is one of the only people that can tell a story a different way, and people don't immediately get enraged at it. I'm sure there's lots of people that prefer the source material of A Clockwork Orange or The Shining to Kubrick's films, but it's more of a controversial thing rather than an outright "you fucked up."
yeah, right. Or you just did it wrong. Yeah, it's almost like, well, you've created this. It's not like you just went in and tried to make a movie of it and just made a bad adaptation. It's almost like a whole separate work that is based on, that stands on its own in a way.
Yeah. This quote from the book actually fits well with the conversation we're having right now. It's funny how the colors of the like real world only seem really real when you video them on the screen, because he's being induced to. I guess I should back up and explain the Ludovico technique. So Alex is convicted of murder and he's going to serve like 16 years or something like that. And he gets 2 years into his sentence, and he finds out about this experimental reform technique, and he volunteers for it. And basically this technique is they sit him down and they tape his eyelids open, and they make him watch these films that are hyper violent. And they give him a drug that makes him nauseous, and it's classic what would you call it, classic aversion conditioning aversion therapy. Basically making him associate this negative feeling with these feelings of with these sites of violence. And then they couple in music, because he's a big fan of the classics. And it's specifically Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that they induce in with this to heighten that emotional reaction, which that's where we get the term A Clockwork Orange. Is what they're describing with A Clockwork Orange is you have this person, this fruit, that is completely on a clock. It's completely up to the mechanics. And that's what we really see at this point in the story, is they're able to remove the dark desires that he has, and through association. So he has to have in order to not have this oppressive, sick feeling that he associates with violence. He has to do something good, something contrary to his will, which takes away his free will.
Right.
Which there's a character, the preacher is telling him, I really disapprove of this technique. And then later on, he's telling this to F. Alexander. He's like, the chaplain didn't want me to do this. And F. Alexander says, well, of course he didn't. He's a Christian. And that is very, the Garden of Eden is all about choice and the choice of free will. The ability to discern between good and evil and choosing to be good is the most Christian story. And so he's like, of course the Christian chaplain didn't want you to have your free will taken away. That's like antithetical to his belief system.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that kind of harkens back to Alex himself saying that there is no default, that you are choosing one or the other, and that if you're going to examine why people are good or why people are bad, then you also should try to figure out what makes people choose to be good. And and in this, like, well, he's been pushed around and influenced completely in his life, but now it's almost like this is the ultimate control, in that they have taken away any taken things further than influence into a complete level of control of what someone does.
And as we were discussing earlier, I think, at least my take on the story, is that they've created this fucked up world so that they could introduce these kind of techniques. It's like, look what people will do with their free will. Look what's our youth is so violent, so that they can create the Clockwork Orange, create this take away free will, take away people's free will.
Well, that was also part of the whole idea in 1984, where they were doing things like changing the language. So with the idea being that it would become impossible for someone to even think of something that went against the party, because they no longer had the language to think a thought that was wrong, think that was wrong. Kind of the same way of achieving total control over people to achieve your own ends by taking away their ability to choose anything.
There's man, you familiar with Yeonmi Park?
No.
She escaped North Korea. She gives lectures, very powerful, Alice. If you want to cry, go listen to Yeonmi Park. We'll probably do a book of hers at some point. But she talks about like living in North Korea. Her mother actually believed that Kim Jong-il could read their minds. So she would not even have negative thoughts about the government. And she would tell her daughters, don't even think ill of, because that's just, it's hard to imagine and like even put ourselves in that frame of being, because like we more or less understand reality a lot better. But if you really think that, like, that's a powerful thing to believe. And it kind of actually that has religious connotations as well. If you think there's a man in the clouds, it doesn't really matter if you think he's a good guy or not, if he's gonna fucking kill you or torture you, but the other thing, in their language, they don't have a word for the individual. They just have we. They don't have
Oh,
a
interesting.
word for I,
Hmm.
and they certainly don't have a word for freedom or
Mhm.
liberty or. And it is interesting. Like, I just I only bring that up because of what you were saying. It's like I wonder how much of our like we think in English.
Mhm.
It's like I have an internal narrative in my head that's in English,
Yeah.
and that really controls the way you think.
Mhm.
You could change a language or introduce a new language as a way to control people.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there is a fair amount of research on that. That it's been a while since I've read anything about this, but the extent to which the language that you speak, kind of governs, how you think about things. And I think there may still be a lot of controversy about that, to extent that has an effect, but it has some.
Hmm.
The way you think about things and certain concepts are influenced by the way things are expressed in the language that you grow up with, or are fluent in.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like if I were to go learn a second language, I'd probably still think in
Mhm.
English, and I don't know how much. I don't know how much you can control that or do anything about that.
Yeah.
Unless I'm sure maybe you could train yourself to
Mhm.
think in a second language, but you're still thinking in a framework, in a
Mhm.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we're all clockwork oranges in a certain way.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think you just can't, you understand as much as about yourself and your environment as much as you can. There are certain things you can't escape about. Every single social interaction and that you've had as up throughout your growing up.
Yeah.
You can think about it all you want, but there's some amount of it I don't think you can escape.
Yeah. I think you can kind of control what you do with that, but you can't control that it has an effect on
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
That's definitely true. There, especially with like the younger you are,
Hmm.
like formulative memories,
Hmm.
like that will shape who you are. It's why like parenting and like teaching are like the most important jobs a
Hmm.
person can have. Like shout out to all of our teachers out there. Like it's a very underappreciated job, and it's the most important thing one can do with their life, uh, is teach, especially to the young and impressionable. It's a big responsibility, um, and I think like as a parent, like you cannot get it right. You will fail, because human error, and you can just do the best you can do. Uh, and but yeah, those memories stick with you. They form who you are. um Especially like the traumatic ones, you can't
Hmm.
really ever get away with that. And I think that, I'm not a therapist, but I think like that is a big part of therapy,
Hmm.
is understanding that, like, you don't, not necessarily escapism, but like
Hmm.
you actually confronting it
Hmm.
and understanding that this is part of your experience now.
Hmm.
um but you don't have to be a slave to it.
Right. Yeah. But also, even outside of that, I mean, you've got the very language that first learn, and the social conventions, and what how people behave, when you're a child, and how those things, like, even if they're not explicitly taught amidst the water that you swim in, that those things are going to have an effect on just the way your brain even operates and interprets information, in the way that I think you can step outside of it to a certain extent, but not completely.
Yeah, yeah. It's um it's uh, a weird time to be alive, and I think every time is a weird time to be alive. Life is weird,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
the youth coming up now are they're not in a good place. Like they're not as it's hard to I just can't imagine how difficult it must be to be coming up right now. What to make of the reality in the world, especially now. Like we there are certain pivotal moments in history that like really change the shape of the world, and I think we're at the biggest one yet, which is AI. The deep fake stuff's getting real. It's going to get to a point where you cannot believe even what you see and hear.
Yeah.
Because it is hard. It's impossible at a certain point to distinguish reality from fiction.
Yeah.
I think really the takeaway from this does tie back into Clockwork Orange. The takeaway is try to think for yourself, and part of thinking for yourself is when you think something, think about how you arrived at that. Think about what were the external influences that led you to think that way.
Yeah.
Well,
suspicious of any glass of milk that anybody.
Yeah, the milk and the knives. Well, this has been really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for indulging in this juicy fruit with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
It's always interesting.
Yeah. Next month we're gonna read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. It's a newer book. It's like 2014, so not newer, but newer than this.
Yeah, for sure.
I do know there's a film as well. I've heard it's not good at all. In fact, I heard that the director of the film watched the movie the director of the film read the book like a decade prior, and then based the movie off of his memory of
that's great.
his 10-year-old memory of the book. So it's very loose. Anyway, it's supposed to be some government psyop, deep state stuff as well, except this time with aliens. So I'm very excited for that.
Yeah.
You should be very well aware of Cassette Stress at this point. They're house favorites here at Rhetoric Rabbit Hole. But if you haven't
get rid
checked,
of us.
as much as I try, no. Yeah, they're one of my favorite acts in Nashville. And if you haven't checked them out yet, definitely do so. I tagged Cassette Stress in this video, so when you're done with this, go check them out. And then you have some dates coming up again.
So we're playing 2 days from now on Thursday, the 29th at Dark Matter with LB by Cassette and Hussy Fit, another couple great Nashville bands. And then we're playing on July 14th at Far Out Fest, and that's a 2-day thing. A lot of cool bands. That's one to check out too.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Alice. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks.